Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where our series examining the worst and least known events of the 1970s continues. This time we explore troubling and fascinating stories from 1973. It was a year full of disasters. A leader was assassinated, scientists died in a submarine, prisoners escaped by using a helicopter, and that's just a taste of the terrible things we will cover today. Let's start with a passenger airplane which was destroyed by the Israeli military. Libyan Airlines Flight 114. In the 1970s, Libya had its own airline, which flew several Boeing 737s. One of these, Flight 114, regularly flew from Tripoli to Cairo. Along the way, the plane usually stopped in Benghazi. On February 21, 1973, the aircraft was flying its normal route. While in Benghazi, it picked up 113 passengers. There were 9 crew operating the plane that day. The passengers were mostly from Arab countries, but there were 2 Germans aboard, as well as 1 United States citizen. Around 1:45 p.m., Flight 114 was approaching the Cairo airport. A sandstorm in the area reduced visibility and forced the pilots to attempt navigating with just their instruments. The crew didn't realize that they had veered off course and entered Israeli-controlled airspace over the Sinai Peninsula. At 1:15 p.m., the pilots on Flight 114 looked out the window and saw fighter jets. They realized their instruments weren't working correctly. The pilots also assumed the fighter jets were Egyptian. In reality, the jets were Israeli Phantom F-4s. The F-4s attempted several times to communicate with Flight 114. They pulled alongside the Boeing aircraft and used hand signals. They kept dipping their wings to indicate that the flight crew should change course and follow them. The pilots of Flight 114 decided to ignore the fighter pilots and turned the plane to the west. It was not the direction the F-4s had indicated. The fighter pilots took this as a sign that the passenger plane was trying to flee. They opened fire on the Boeing aircraft with M61 cannons. The wings and hydraulic systems on the 737 were severely damaged. The pilots attempted an emergency landing in the desert, but as the plane touched the ground, it hit a sand dune. The 737 caught on fire after impacting the ground. When the Israeli military arrived at the crash site, several passengers were still burning alive in the wreckage. Of the 113 passengers, only 5 survived. The Israeli government said that they considered Flight 114 to be a security risk. They didn't know if it was trying to spy on a nearby airbase or perhaps even fly into buildings as part of a suicide mission. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was enraged. He paid a terrorist group to blow up an Israeli passenger plane, but the attackers were caught by airport security. He also ordered a Libyan submarine to destroy a British ocean liner, but the attack was never carried out. Assassination in Bermuda. Richard Sharples was born in England on August 6, 1916. In 1936, he graduated from a prominent military academy and was assigned to the Welsh Guards. Richard loved to sail on his yacht. He shared the joy of sailing with his close friend Edward Heath. Edward was Prime Minister of England from 1970 to 1974, and he helped Richard advance politically as well. Richard was elected to Parliament in 1954. He resigned in 1972 to accept a position as Governor of Bermuda. Unfortunately, Richard wouldn't have long to enjoy his promotion. On the evening of March 10, 1973, Richard hosted a dinner party for a small number of guests. As he left the governor's residence to walk his Great Dane, a captain from the Welsh Guards joined him. A gunman suddenly appeared and began firing at the 2 men. He killed Richard, his guard, and the dog they were walking. The police launched an investigation. After 6 months, they finally found the person who killed Richard and his guard. The man's name was Erskine Burrows. He also confessed to killing 2 other people before the assassination. In his written confession, Erskine Burrows said, "The motive for killing the governor was to seek to make the people, black people in particular, become aware of the evilness and wickedness of the colonialist system in this island. Secondly, the motive was to show that these colonialists were just ordinary people like ourselves who eat, sleep, and die just like anybody else, and that we need not stand in fear and awe of them. Erskine wasn't alone when he ambushed Richard Sharples. He also had an accomplice named Larry Tacklyn. Nobody had been executed within the British Empire since the Second World War, but an exception was made for the two men. They were sentenced to die by hanging. On December 2nd, 1977, the sentence was carried out. Erskine Burrows and Larry Tacklyn became the last two people executed in the British Empire. The citizens of Bermuda were not happy about the assassins being killed. After news of the executions reached the rest of the island, people began rioting. It took 3 days to suppress the protests, and it caused millions of dollars in damages. The island of Bermuda voted for independence in 1995. The referendum failed, and the island is still under British rule today. Johnson's Sea Link. Edwin Albert Link was born in Huntington, Indiana on July 26, 1904. He spent his life creating inventions which helped ensure that he became a pioneer in aviation and submersibles. In 1927, he acquired one of the first Cessna aircraft ever produced and flew it all over the country. This experience allowed him to create the Link Trainer in the early 1930s. It was a mechanical flight simulator used to train pilots until the 1950s. In 1954, Edwin decided to change his focus to underwater archaeology. In March 1967, he introduced the world to his new creation called Deep Diver. It was a lockout submersible. This meant that divers could travel to the bottom of the ocean, then leave the submarine in scuba diving gear. After it was finished, they could return to the safety of the submersible. Eventually, it was determined that Deep Diver was unsafe in cold water or at extreme depths. So, in 1971, Edwin created a new submersible. It was called Johnson's Sea Link. In June 1973, the Johnson's Sea Link was used for a routine dive near Key West. 4 divers went to the bottom so they could examine the wreck of the USS Fred T. Barry. However, the submersible became trapped in debris near the wreck. It took 24 hours to free the submarine. 2 of the divers died from carbon dioxide poisoning. One of them was Edwin's son, Edwin Clayton Link. In response to the disaster, Edwin created a new unmanned vehicle that could be used to free trapped submersibles. The Johnson's Sea Link vehicles were used for several years to retrieve wrecks from the bottom of the ocean. One of them was used after the Challenger explosion in 1986 to retrieve debris. Edwin Link passed away on September 7, 1981. His submersibles remained in use until July 2011. Upstairs Lounge Attack. The first Pride March took place on June 24, 1973. Homosexuals in New York City showed their support for each other by marching in the streets. The celebrations spread to several major cities all over the United States. Some places, such as New Orleans, did not participate. While gay people made their presence known across the country, it was business as usual in the Crescent City. The Upstairs Lounge was a club that catered to gay men in the city. It was located on the second floor of a building that also contained other businesses. On the night of June 24th, members of the Metropolitan Community Church were having drinks at the establishment. At 7:56 p.m., a buzzer from downstairs was heard. Luther Boggs, an Air Force veteran, went to check on it and found that the stairs leading to the front door were on fire. Someone set the fire on purpose, and it blocked most of the patrons from leaving. The bartender, Buddy Rasmussen, led 20 people to the roof, saving their lives. Several people were saved by jumping from windows. Another group removed the air conditioner and escaped that way. Luther Boggs escaped from a window but was so badly burned that he died a few days later. Firefighters were delayed by traffic but eventually arrived. They were able to put out the fire after only 16 minutes. 29 people died in the disaster and 18 more were seriously injured. The arsonist was never identified. Additionally, most local churches refused to hold services for victims of the fire. Those that chose to hold services for the dead received numerous complaints in the form of hate mail. Lillehammer Affair. In 1972, members of the Palestinian group called Black September attacked Israeli Olympic athletes in Munich, Germany. Some athletes were killed and others were taken hostage. In retaliation for the event, Israel began Operation Wrath of God. This authorized members of the Israeli intelligence service called Mossad to track down and kill members of the Black September group. Mossad was willing to do this even if it meant violating the laws of other countries. Early in the summer of 1973, Israeli agents identified a man they thought was Ali Hassan Salameh. He was one of the leaders of Black September, and it appeared he was now working as a waiter in Lillehammer, Norway. On the evening of July 21st, as Salameh was walking down the road, a car with 4 Mossad agents pulled up beside him. 2 of them exited the vehicle and shot Salameh 13 times. As he fell dead, the agents climbed back into the car and took off. The residents of Lillehammer were astonished. Their town had not experienced a murder for at least 36 years. Unfortunately, Mossad was wrong about their target. He was from Morocco and was named Ahmed Bouchiki. The authorities in Norway were not happy about Israeli agents murdering people. The 9 members of the hit team escaped Norway, but 6 others were captured and interrogated. The Mossad agents were convicted and sentenced to prison, but were released to Israel in 1975. The operation in Norway exposed an underground network that Mossad used to operate undetected in Europe. They had carried out several assassinations prior to the Lillehammer incident that would have remained undetected if not for agents being captured. The real Ali Hassan Salameh was finally located and killed in Beirut, Lebanon, on January 22, 1979. A bomb was attached to a remote-controlled car. When it detonated, it killed the intended target, plus 8 other people. An additional 18 victims were injured in the explosion. Helicopter escape. In the late 1960s, the Irish Republican Army attempted to create a united Ireland. To do this, they needed to convince Northern Ireland to no longer exist as part of the United Kingdom. The path to accomplishing this goal involved using violence to kill political targets. In August 1971, Northern Ireland started using internment without trial. This allowed them to imprison suspected revolutionaries without first having to give them the benefit of due process. In September 1973, IRA Chief of Staff Seamus Twomey was sentenced to 5 years in Mountjoy Prison. 2 other members of the organization, J.B. O'Hagan and Kevin Mallon, were sent there as well. Almost as soon as they were delivered to the prison, IRA leadership began making plans to retrieve them. On the first attempt to free the prisoners, the IRA delivered rope ladders and explosives. However, prison guards found the rope ladders and the plan failed. Instead of giving up, the IRA decided to try a different approach. A business called Irish Helicopters operated out of the Dublin airport. A member of the IRA approached the manager of the business and chartered a helicopter for October 31st. The pilot was told that he was flying photographers around so they could take pictures, but after picking up his first passenger at the airport, he was told to land to pick up additional photography equipment. After landing, 2 masked men with guns approached the helicopter. They entered and told the pilot that if he did as told, he wouldn't be harmed. The pilot was instructed to fly the helicopter to Mountjoy Prison and land in the exercise yard. The prison guards didn't realize that an escape attempt was in progress, so they were as surprised as everyone else when the chopper landed. Twomey, O'Hagan, and Mallon climbed aboard while other prisoners attacked the guards. Moments later, the 3 prisoners were free. The helicopter landed at a nearby racetrack. The pilot was released as promised, and the escaped prisoners took a taxi to freedom. The prison escape became front-page news all over the world. In response, the IRA prisoners were moved to a new secure facility. On December 10th, J.B. O'Hagan was recaptured. He escaped again on August 18th. He was recaptured in 1977 and was finally released from prison in 1982. Whether it was due to political differences, irrational hate, or accident, 1973 was full of death and mayhem. We only covered a small part of it in this episode. Are there any events we should have covered but didn't? If so, tell us about it in the comments below. If you enjoy learning about horrible history, then we ask you to like this video. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We would hate for you to miss future episodes of this series. Also, please be aware that we do have a Patreon page. We accept PayPal donations too, and we have a merchandise store, though it admittedly needs some work. Links are in the video description if you're interested. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.